The woman they dragged from the back of the wagon had fire in her eyes even as the rain began to fall. And Marcus Lawson knew right then, watching from across the muddy street, that she was either the bravest or most foolish person he had ever seen in all his 26 years riding through Montana territory. It was late April of 1878, and Hecla had seen its share of spring storms roll down from the mountains, but this one promised to be something fiercer. The sky had turned the color of old bruises, purple and black, and swirling with a rage that made even the hardened miners and cattlemen start boarding up windows and securing livestock. Marcus had just finished tying his horse, Cassidy, to the post outside the general store when he heard the commotion near the Silver Bell Saloon. The woman stumbled as two men shoved her forward into the street. She was maybe 22 or 23, with dark auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and now whipped around her face in the rising wind. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, revealing a white chemise beneath, and there was a bruise forming on her cheekbone. But it was her eyes that held Marcus transfixed, green as new spring grass and blazing with defiance. "You think you can steal from me?" The man who stepped out behind her was Samuel Greer, owner of the Silver Bell and half the mining claims around Hecla. He was a big man, running to fat now in his middle years, with a reputation for cruelty that kept most folks from crossing him. "You think because you are a woman I will not make an example of you." "I did not steal anything," the woman said, her voice clear and steady despite the situation. She had an accent, something Eastern, refined, not the kind of voice you heard often in a rough mining town like Hecla. "I worked for 3 weeks in your establishment washing dishes and serving meals, and you refused to pay me what you promised." Greer's face went red. "You calling me a liar, girl?" "I am calling you a thief and a cheat," she said, lifting her chin. "And I took only what you owed me, not a cent more." The crowd that had gathered gasped. Nobody talked to Samuel Greer like that. Marcus felt his hand move instinctively toward the Colt revolver at his hip, though he was not sure yet what he intended to do with it. He had only been in Hecla 2 days, having driven a small herd of cattle up from his family's ranch near Virginia City to sell to the mining company. He had no stake in whatever dispute this was, no reason to get involved, but something about the woman's courage, standing there alone against a man twice her size with the whole town watching and no one stepping forward to help, made his jaw tighten. "You have got some nerve," Greer said, stepping closer to her. "You know what we do to thieves in this town." "I know what cowards do when they outnumber their victims," she replied. Greer's hand shot out and grabbed her arm, jerking her forward. "Then maybe you need a reminder of what happens to women who do not know their place. Boys, take her out to the edge of town and let her walk back. Maybe the storm will cool that sharp tongue of hers." The 2 men who had dragged her from the saloon grabbed her again. The woman struggled, landing a solid kick to one man's shin that made him curse, but they were too strong. They began hauling her toward the north end of town, where the street gave way to open prairie and the foothills beyond. The rain was falling harder now, fat drops that hit the dust and turned it to mud within seconds. Thunder rumbled overhead, close enough that Marcus felt it in his chest. This was not just a spring shower. This was the kind of storm that could kill someone caught out in the open, especially with night coming on. "Somebody should stop this," a woman's voice said from the boardwalk. Marcus turned and saw Mrs. Chen, who ran the boarding house where he had taken a room. She was a small Chinese woman, one of the few who had stayed in Hecla after the railroad work dried up. "That girl, she will die out there." "Not our business," muttered the man next to her, a shopkeeper Marcus had bought supplies from that morning. "Greer runs this town, best not to cross him." Marcus watched as they dragged the woman past the last building, past where the wooden structures gave way to empty land. She was still fighting, still trying to dig her heels into the mud, but they were relentless. When they reached a point about a quarter-mile from town, they shoved her hard. She fell to her knees in the wet grass. One of the men said something Marcus could not hear over the wind, and they both laughed before turning back toward town. The woman got to her feet slowly. Even from this distance, Marcus could see she was soaked through, her dress clinging to her frame. She looked back at the town, at the crowd still watching from the safety of the covered boardwalks and doorways. Then she turned and started walking north, away from Hecla, into the teeth of the storm. Lightning split the sky, illuminating her solitary figure against the darkening landscape. Thunder crashed immediately after, so loud it made several people jump. The crowd began to disperse, hurrying to get inside before the worst of the storm hit. Within minutes, the street was nearly empty. Marcus stood there, rain pouring off the brim of his hat, watching the woman grow smaller in the distance. Every instinct told him to mind his own business. He had cattle to finish selling, paperwork to complete, and his father expected him back at the ranch by the end of the week. Getting on Samuel Greer's bad side could complicate future business deals. The smart thing, the sensible thing, was to go back to his room, wait out the storm, and forget he had ever seen any of this. He turned toward his horse. Cassidy, a bay gelding with a white star on his forehead, was shifting nervously, ears back against the wind and rain. Marcus untied the reins. "You are really going after her?" Mrs. Chen had come down from the boardwalk, holding a shawl over her head against the rain. Marcus looked at her, then back at the prairie where the woman had vanished into the storm. He could not see her anymore. The rain was too heavy, the light too dim. "Cannot just leave her out there," he heard himself say. Mrs. Chen nodded. "She was staying in my boarding house. Her name is Beatrice Rollins. She came from Boston 3 months ago. She is looking for her brother. He was working one of the mining claims, but nobody has seen him in months. Greer, maybe. He owns many claims. Men die in the mines, and sometimes records get lost." Mrs. Chen's expression was grim. "That girl, she has been asking too many questions. I think maybe Greer wanted her gone for more reasons than some missing wages." Marcus swung up into the saddle. The rain was cold, and he knew it would only get colder as the temperature dropped with nightfall. "If I am not back by morning, send someone looking. Be careful. Greer has men who do his dirty work." He did not answer, just turned Cassidy north and urged him into a trot. The horse did not like heading into the storm, but he was well trained and responded to Marcus's commands. They left the town behind, following the muddy track that led toward the mountains. The wind hit them full force once they cleared the buildings. It was not just rain anymore. Hail began to mix in, small pellets that stung where they hit exposed skin. Marcus pulled his coat tighter and leaned forward in the saddle, squinting against the onslaught. Visibility was terrible, maybe 20 feet at best. Lightning flashed again, and in that brief moment of illumination, he saw her. She was still walking, though she was stumbling now, barely keeping her feet. Her arms were wrapped around herself, and her hair hung in wet ropes down her back. She did not look back, just kept moving forward like if she stopped she would never start again. "Miss Rollins." Marcus called out, but the wind tore his words away. He pushed Cassidy faster, closing the distance between them. "Miss Rollins." This time she heard him. She turned, and he saw the fear flash across her face before recognition set in. She must have thought it was Greer's men coming back for her. When she saw it was a stranger, the fear did not entirely leave, but some of the tension went out of her shoulders. Marcus brought Cassidy alongside her and swung down from the saddle in one smooth motion. Up close, he could see she was shaking violently, her lips tinged with blue. Her eyes, those striking green eyes, were unfocused in a way that worried him. Exposure was setting in fast. "You need to get on my horse," he said, having to shout to be heard over the storm. "We need to find shelter. Who are you?" Her words were slurred slightly, her jaw clenched against the chattering of her teeth. "Name is Marcus Lawson. I saw what happened in town. You cannot stay out here. This storm will kill you." "Better than going back there," she said, but there was no real conviction in her voice anymore. She was too cold, too exhausted. "I am not taking you back to town," Marcus said. He put a hand on her arm, felt how cold she was even through the wet fabric. "But you need to let me help you." She looked up at him, searching his face for something. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded, though the movement was shaky. Marcus gripped her waist and helped her up into the saddle. She nearly slid right off the other side, her coordination gone, but he caught her and steadied her. "Hold onto the saddle horn," he instructed. Her hands fumbled with it, fingers too numb to grip properly. He took the reins and began leading Cassidy, one hand on the horse's bridle and the other ready to steady Beatrice if she started to fall. They needed shelter, and they needed it fast. Marcus knew this country well enough from his cattle drives. There was an abandoned line shack about 2 miles east, built years ago when this had been open-range cattle country before the mining boom. If it was still standing, it would at least provide some protection from the wind and rain. The trek felt endless. The hail intensified, pieces now the size of small stones that left bruises where they struck. Marcus felt one hit his shoulder hard enough to make him wince. Beatrice had slumped forward over the saddle horn, and he was not sure if she was conscious anymore. He kept one hand on her back, feeling the shallow rise and fall of her breathing. "Stay with me," he said, knowing she probably could not hear him but saying it anyway. "Just a little farther." Lightning illuminated the landscape again, and he saw it, the dark shape of the line shack about 100 yards ahead. Relief flooded through him. He picked up the pace, half dragging Cassidy forward. The horse, sensing shelter, needed little encouragement. The shack was in better shape than he had hoped. The roof looked intact, and the door, though hanging crooked on its hinges, was still there. Marcus tied Cassidy to a post under a small overhang on the lee side of the building where he would have some protection from the worst of the wind, then reached up for Beatrice. She barely responded when he pulled her from the saddle. Her body was limp, a dead weight in his arms. Marcus kicked the door open and carried her inside. The interior was dim, but dry. There was an old potbelly stove in one corner, a rough wooden bunk against one wall, and not much else. Someone had left a small stack of wood beside the stove, probably other travelers who had used the shack as shelter over the years. Marcus laid Beatrice on the bunk and immediately set about getting a fire started. His hands were numb, but years of practice made the movements automatic. He had matches in a waterproof tin in his coat pocket, and within minutes, he had kindling catching. He fed it carefully, building the fire up until flames were licking at the larger pieces of wood. Heat began to radiate from the stove. He turned back to Beatrice. She was conscious, but only barely, her eyes open but unfocused. Her shaking had gotten worse, the violent tremors of someone whose body was fighting hypothermia. "We need to get you out of those wet clothes," Marcus said. "You will freeze if we do not." She did not respond, maybe did not even hear him. Marcus hesitated, knowing the impropriety of what he was about to do, but also knowing it was necessary. He had seen men die from exposure before. Wet clothes in this cold were a death sentence. Working quickly and as respectfully as he could, he removed her soaked dress and petticoats. He left her chemise and drawers on, though they were damp, and wrapped her in his coat and the saddle blanket he had brought in from Cassidy. Then he rubbed her arms and legs through the blankets, trying to stimulate circulation and warm her up. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, color began to return to her face. The shaking continued but became less violent. Her eyes focused on him, really seeing him for the first time. "You came after me," she said, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Could not leave you out there," Marcus replied. He sat back on his heels, satisfied that she was out of immediate danger. "How do you feel?" "Cold. Tired." She paused, looking around the shack as if trying to figure out where she was. "Foolish. You are not foolish. Greer is the one who should be ashamed, throwing a woman out into a storm like that. I knew he was a bad man. I should have been more careful." She closed her eyes, exhaustion clear in every line of her face. "I just wanted my wages. I needed the money to keep looking for my brother. Mrs. Chen told me about that, about your brother." Beatrice's eyes opened again, sharp now despite her exhaustion. "Did she tell you he disappeared? That nobody in this town seems to remember him, even though I know he was here. Even though I have his letters saying he was working for Greer's operation." Marcus fed another piece of wood into the stove. Outside, the storm raged on, but here in the shack, the temperature was rising to something almost comfortable. "I have heard stories about Greer, about how he runs his business. Nothing anyone could prove but stories. He knows what happened to Thomas. I am certain of it." Her hands emerged from the blankets to rub her face. "I have been searching for 3 months. Nobody will tell me anything. And now I have made myself Greer's enemy, which means I will never find out the truth. What will you do? I do not know." She looked at him then, really looked at him, taking in his weather-beaten face, the scar over his left eyebrow, the steady blue eyes. "Why did you help me? You do not know me. And from what I have learned about Hecla, nobody crosses Samuel Greer without consequences." Marcus shrugged. "My mother raised me to do the right thing, even when it is not convenient. Could not watch them throw you out into that storm and do nothing." "Your mother raised you well." A small smile touched Beatrice's lips, the first warmth he had seen from her. "Thank you, you saved my life. Just glad I got to you in time." He stood and moved to the door, peering out at the storm. If anything, it had gotten worse. The wind was howling like something alive, and the rain was coming down in sheets. "We are going to be here a while. This storm is not letting up any time soon." Behind him, he heard Beatrice shift on the bunk. "I suppose there are worse places to be stranded. At least it is dry." Marcus turned back. She had sat up, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair was beginning to dry in the heat from the stove, turning from dark auburn to a lighter shade with hints of copper. Even bedraggled and bruised, she was striking. But more than that, there was something in her bearing, a strength that showed in the set of her jaw and the directness of her gaze that drew him. "Tell me about your brother," he said, settling onto the floor with his back against the wall. "What makes you so sure Greer has something to do with his disappearance?" Beatrice was quiet for a moment, her fingers worrying at the edge of the blanket. "Thomas wrote to me regularly, every 2 weeks, like clockwork. His letters were full of optimism about the mining opportunities out here, about how he was working as a surveyor for a big operation and making good money. He sent some of it home to help our parents." Her voice caught slightly. Then the letters stopped, just stopped, with no explanation. "I wrote to him, but nothing came back. Finally, I wrote to the sheriff here in Hecla, asking him to check on Thomas. He wrote back saying there was no record of anyone by that name in town. But you did not believe him. I had letters with the Hecla postmark. Letters describing the town, describing the people. I knew he was here, so I used the money Thomas had sent home and bought a train ticket west." She pulled the blankets tighter. "When I arrived, people acted like they had never heard of him, but I found the boarding house where he stayed. Mrs. Chen remembered him. She said he had worked for Greer's operation, surveying new claims in the mountains. Did she know what happened to him? No. She said one day he just did not come back. His things were still in his room. She kept them for a while, hoping he would return, but eventually she had to rent the room to someone else. She still has his trunk stored in her cellar. Marcus frowned. Did you talk to Greer about it? I tried. He claimed he had no record of employing anyone named Thomas Rollins. But he was lying. I could see it in his eyes. Her hands clenched into fists. That is why I took the job at the Silver Bell. I thought if I worked there, I might hear something, might find some clue about what happened to Thomas. But Greer figured out what I was doing. He refused to pay me, probably hoping I would just leave town. When I confronted him when I took what he owed me, he decided to make an example of me instead. The fire crackled, filling the silence. Marcus thought about his own brother Jake back home at the ranch. They fought sometimes the way brothers do, but Marcus could not imagine the agony of not knowing where Jake was, of searching for months with no answers. When this storm clears, we will go back to town, Marcus said. You can stay at Mrs. Chen's boarding house and I will ask around. Maybe a fresh set of ears will hear something different. Beatrice shook her head. You have already done too much. I cannot ask you to put yourself at risk for my problems. You are not asking, I am offering. He met her eyes. Besides, I do not much care for men who abuse their power. And I especially do not care for men who throw women out into storms, so helping you would be my pleasure. She studied him for a long moment, and he felt something shift in the air between them. Recognition, maybe, of a kindred spirit, or perhaps just gratitude. Whatever it was, it made his chest feel tight in an unfamiliar way. You are a strange man, Marcus Lawson, she said finally, but I think you might be a good one. I try to be. He pulled his hat off and ran a hand through his hair, which was still damp from the rain. Get some rest. We are going to be here until morning at least, and you need to recover your strength. Beatrice lay back down, curling onto her side on the narrow bunk. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out into sleep. Marcus stayed where he was, feeding the fire and listening to the storm howl outside. His mind was working, turning over everything she had told him. Men disappeared in mining towns. That was a fact. Cave-ins, accidents, claimed disputes that turned violent. The frontier was a dangerous place, but something about this felt different. The way Greer had reacted to Beatrice's questions, the way he had tried to run her out of town. A man with nothing to hide would have just ignored her or helped her search. Greer's hostility suggested he had something to protect. Marcus thought about the cattle he still needed to sell, about the timeline he was on. His father would be irritated if he delayed his return. But looking at Beatrice sleeping fitfully on the bunk, remembering the courage it had taken for her to stand up to Greer in front of the whole town, he knew he was not going anywhere. Not until he helped her find answers. The storm raged through the night. Marcus dozed sitting up, waking periodically to feed the fire and check on Beatrice. Twice she cried out in her sleep, words he could not make out but that sounded anguished. Each time, he moved to the bunk and spoke softly until she settled again. He told himself it was just common decency, looking after someone who had been through an ordeal. But when his hand brushed her forehead, checking for fever, and she unconsciously leaned into his touch, something in him responded that had nothing to do with decency. Dawn came slowly, the darkness outside the windows fading to gray. The rain had stopped, but Marcus could hear wind still gusting. When he opened the door and looked out, he saw a transformed landscape. The storm had been fierce. Tree branches littered the ground and water stood in pools across the prairie. But the sky was clearing, patches of blue showing between breaking clouds. Cassidy was where he had left him, none the worse for wear. Marcus checked him over, made sure he was sound, then gave him water from his canteen and a handful of grain from his saddlebag. The horse huffed softly and butted his head against Marcus's chest in appreciation. "We will head back soon," Marcus murmured, scratching behind Cassidy's ears. "But we are taking the long way. I want to see something first." When he returned to the shack, Beatrice was awake. She had arranged her dress near the stove to dry and was sitting on the bunk wrapped in the blankets, her expression thoughtful. "Good morning," Marcus said. "How do you feel?" "Sore, foolish, grateful." She managed a small smile. "Mostly grateful. I know I said it last night, but thank you. You did not have to do what you did. Already told you, could not do anything else." He moved to the stove and poured water from his canteen into a small pot to heat. He had coffee in his saddlebag and some jerky and hardtack that would serve for breakfast. "Your dress is almost dry. Once you are dressed and we have eaten something, I want to take a ride before we head back to town." "A ride where?" "To Greer's mining operation. It is about 5 miles north of here, up in the foothills. If your brother was surveying claims for him, that is where he would have been working. Maybe there is something there, some clue people in town would not know about." Beatrice's eyes lit up. "You think we might find something?" "I think it is worth looking, but it could be dangerous. Greer will have men working the claims. If they figure out who we are or what we are looking for, there could be trouble. I do not care about danger. If there is even a chance of finding out what happened to Thomas, I have to take it." Marcus had expected that answer, had seen the determination in her last night when she stood up to Greer. It was one of the things that drew him to her, that fierce loyalty. But it worried him too. Determination without caution could get a person killed, especially in a place like this. "Then we will go," he said. "But we do it smart. We stay together, we do not take unnecessary risks, and if I say we need to leave, we leave." "Agreed." "Agreed." They ate a quick breakfast and let Beatrice's dress finish drying. While they waited, they talked. Marcus found himself telling her about the ranch, about growing up in Montana territory, when it was even wilder than it was now. He told her about his parents, about how his father had built their spread from nothing, about how his mother kept everyone in line with nothing more than a sharp look and a sharper tongue. Beatrice told him about Boston, about growing up in a city so different from this open country it might as well have been another world. She talked about her parents, her father who worked as a clerk and her mother who took in sewing to help make ends meet. She talked about Thomas, 2 years older than her, who had always dreamed of adventure and opportunity beyond the narrow streets of their neighborhood. He was supposed to come back a rich man, Beatrice said, a sad smile on her face. That was his plan. Make his fortune in the mines and come home with enough money to set us all up properly. Instead, he just vanished. "We will find out what happened to him," Marcus said, surprised by the conviction in his own voice. He barely knew this woman, had no real reason to make such a promise. But he meant it. When the dress was dry enough, Beatrice changed back into it behind the blanket Marcus held up for privacy. The fabric was stained and torn, but it was better than nothing. She fashioned her hair into a practical braid, and though she still had the bruise on her cheek and looked worn from her ordeal, there was fire back in her eyes. They set out with Beatrice riding behind Marcus, her arms wrapped around his waist for stability. The closeness was distracting in a way Marcus had not anticipated. He could feel the warmth of her pressed against his back, could smell the faint scent of her hair when the wind shifted. It made his pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with the dangerous task ahead of them. The ride to Greer's operation took them through some of the most beautiful country Marcus had ever seen. The storm had washed everything clean, and the morning sun made the wet grass sparkle like diamonds. Mountains rose in the distance, still snow-capped despite the lateness of spring. It was the kind of landscape that made a man understand why people came west, why they were willing to risk everything for a chance at something new. They smelled the mining operation before they saw it. The acrid scent of smoke and chemicals, the damp earth smell of excavation. Then they crested a rise, and there it was spread out below them. A sprawling complex of tents and rough buildings, mine shafts sunk into the hillside, and dozens of men working like ants across the landscape. Marcus pulled Cassidy to a stop behind a stand of trees where they could observe without being seen. "That is bigger than I expected." "Thomas wrote about this," Beatrice said, leaning forward to see better. "He said Greer was running the most successful operation in the territory. Silver mostly, but some gold too." They watched for several minutes. The miners were hard at work despite the early hour, hauling ore from the shafts, processing it through sluices and rockers. Marcus saw armed men too, guards positioned at various points around the camp. That was unusual. Most mining operations did not need that level of security unless they were protecting something valuable or hiding something. "There," Beatrice said suddenly, pointing. "That building on the edge of the camp. See how it is set apart from the others, and it has its own guard." Marcus followed her gesture. She was right. The building she indicated was different from the others, more substantial, and there was definitely a man with a rifle posted outside. "Could be where they keep records," Marcus said. "Payroll, claim deeds, surveys. We need to get in there." Not in daylight with all these people around, but maybe tonight, after most of the workers have turned in. Beatrice was quiet for a moment, and he could feel her thinking behind him. "You are talking about breaking in. That is more than just asking questions. That is a crime. Your brother disappeared. Greer is lying about it. Sometimes you have to bend the rules to get justice." He turned his head to look at her. "But I will understand if you do not want to risk it. We could try going to the territorial marshal, see if he will investigate." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The marshal is 3 days' ride from here and probably in Greer's pocket like everyone else. No, if we are going to find the truth, we have to do it ourselves." Her arms tightened around his waist. "I am with you, Marcus, whatever it takes." They spent the rest of the day scouting the area around the mining camp, learning the layout and the patterns of the guards. Marcus found a good spot about half a mile away where they could wait for nightfall, a small depression surrounded by scrub brush that provided concealment. They took turns resting and keeping watch, speaking little but growing more comfortable with each other's presence. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Beatrice broke the silence. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why are you really doing this? And do not say it is just because you were raised right. This is dangerous. You could get hurt or arrested or worse. You have a life, a family waiting for you. Why risk all that for someone you just met?" Marcus was quiet, thinking about how to answer. The truth was, he had been asking himself the same question all day. Why was he doing this? It would be easy to say it was about justice, or about doing what was right. But sitting here with Beatrice, watching the light play across her face, he knew it was more than that. "I suppose," he said slowly, "because I look at you and I see someone worth helping. Someone brave and stubborn and maybe a little crazy, but in a good way." He met her eyes. "And maybe because I have spent most of my life doing what was expected, following the safe path. Helping you feels like doing something that matters, something real." Beatrice reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were warm, her grip firm. "Thank you for seeing me that way. Most people, they look at me and they see a nuisance. A woman who does not know her place, who should just accept that her brother is gone and go home. Those people are fools," Marcus said. "Your brother is lucky to have you, was lucky." Her voice caught. "I have to face the possibility that he is dead, Marcus." that we might find something terrible in those records. We might. But at least you will know, at least you will have tried everything. She nodded, blinking back tears. At least I will know. They fell silent again, but she did not let go of his hand. They sat that way as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to emerge overhead. Marcus was intensely aware of everywhere their bodies touched, of the steady rhythm of her breathing, of the way she occasionally squeezed his hand as if drawing strength from the contact. When full dark had fallen and the mining camp below had quieted, lanterns glowing in only a few buildings, Marcus stirred. "It is time." They approached on foot, leaving Cassidy tied in their hiding spot. Marcus had his revolver, though he hoped desperately he would not need to use it. They moved slowly, carefully, using every bit of cover the landscape provided. The guard outside the record building had been joined by another man, and they were sharing a cigarette and talking in low voices. Marcus and Beatrice waited, pressed flat against the ground behind a pile of mine tailings, hardly breathing. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, one of the guards yawned and said something to the other. They both laughed, and then one of them walked off toward the main camp, probably heading for his bunk. That left one guard. Still not ideal, but better odds. Marcus pulled Beatrice close and whispered directly into her ear, trying to ignore how the contact made his heart race. "Stay here. I am going to create a distraction. When he goes to investigate, you run for the building. I will be right behind you. What are you going to do? Something stupid." He flashed her a quick smile. "Trust me." Before she could argue, he was moving, circling wide around the building. There was a stack of lumber about 50 yards away, probably meant for some construction project. Marcus crept up to it, found a good-sized piece of wood, and hurled it as hard as he could toward the far side of the camp. It landed with a loud crash, knocking over what sounded like metal equipment. The guard straightened immediately, bringing his rifle up. He stared in the direction of the noise, clearly trying to decide what to do. After a moment, he started walking toward it, calling out challenges into the darkness. Marcus sprinted back toward the building. Beatrice was already there, trying the door. It was locked. Marcus pulled a knife from his boot and worked it into the door frame, applying pressure to the latch. It was a cheap lock, meant to keep out casual thieves, not someone determined. After a few seconds of work, something gave and the door swung open. They slipped inside and closed the door behind them. It was pitch black. Marcus fumbled for the matches in his pocket, struck one, and looked around. The building was one large room filled with filing cabinets, shelves of ledgers, and a desk piled with papers. Exactly what they had hoped for. "We need to work fast," Marcus whispered, lighting a small lantern that sat on the desk and turning the flame down low. "He will be back soon." They split up, each taking a section of the filing cabinets. Marcus did not even know what they were looking for exactly, just something with the name Thomas Rollins on it, but Beatrice found it. "Here," she said, her voice tight. She pulled a folder from one of the drawers and brought it to the desk. Inside were surveying notes, maps, and a work ledger. Thomas Rollins's name was at the top of each page, the handwriting neat and precise. "This is his handwriting," Beatrice said, her fingers tracing over the letters. "This is Thomas's work." Marcus leaned over her shoulder, studying the documents. The surveys were dated from 6 months ago, showing various claims in the mountains north of the mining camp. The last entry was dated December 15, 1877. After that, nothing. "Look at this," Marcus said, pointing to one of the maps. Thomas had marked several locations with red ink and made notes in the margins. "Rich vein located. Estimated value significant. Recommend immediate claim filing." "He found something valuable," Beatrice said. That is why Greer is lying about knowing him. If Thomas found something, and Greer filed the claim under his own name instead of properly compensating Thomas, that would be theft. Or worse. Marcus kept reading, a sick feeling growing in his stomach. There was another document in the folder, this one in different handwriting. It was a note, brief and cold. Problem resolved, no loose ends, SG. Samuel Greer. Beatrice saw at the same moment Marcus did. Her face went white. No, oh God, no. We do not know what it means, Marcus said quickly, but even he did not believe that. The implications were too clear. He killed him. Beatrice's voice was barely a whisper. Thomas found something valuable and Greer had him killed so he could take it for himself. Before Marcus could respond, they heard voices outside. The guard was coming back and he was not alone. Someone must have noticed the open door. We need to go, Marcus said urgently. He grabbed the folder and shoved it inside his coat. They could not leave it behind, not when it might be the only proof of what happened to Thomas. Now. They extinguished the lantern and moved to the door. Marcus cracked it open and peered out. There were 3 men approaching, all armed. Going out the front was not an option. He turned and saw a window on the back wall. It was small, but they could fit. Come on. He helped Beatrice through the window first, then squeezed through himself. They dropped to the ground just as the front door banged open and lantern light flooded the building. They ran, not bothering with stealth anymore. Shouts erupted behind them. Someone fired a shot, but it went wide, the shooter probably unable to see them in the darkness. Marcus grabbed Beatrice's hand and pulled her along, his longer legs eating up the ground. She kept pace, gasping but not slowing. They reached the stand of brush where they had waited earlier and dove into it. Marcus pulled Beatrice down flat and put his hand over her mouth, feeling her harsh breathing against his palm. The shouts continued, but they were disorganized, men running in different directions. Nobody seemed to know exactly where the intruders had gone. They lay there for what felt like an eternity, hearts pounding in sync. Gradually, the commotion died down. The searchers gave up and returned to camp. Marcus could hear them arguing about what had been taken, whether it was worth waking Greer up to tell him. Eventually, silence fell again. "Let us get back to Cassidy," Marcus breathed into Beatrice's ear. She nodded against his hand and he slowly released her. They crept away from the camp, moving as quietly as possible. When they finally reached Cassidy, Marcus had never been so relieved to see his horse. They mounted up and rode away, not speaking until they had put several miles between themselves and the mining operation. Only when they reached the line shack did they stop. Marcus helped Beatrice down from the saddle and lit the lantern inside. They looked at each other in the yellow light, and suddenly the reality of what they had just done hit them. They both started laughing, slightly hysterical, adrenaline still pumping through their veins. "That was insane," Beatrice said, bracing her hands on her knees and trying to catch her breath. "We could have been killed, but we were not." Marcus pulled the folder from his coat. "And we got what we needed." Beatrice's laughter died. She looked at the folder and her expression crumpled. "He is dead, is not he? Thomas is dead." Marcus wanted to lie to give her false hope, but he respected her too much for that. "I think so. I am sorry." She sank onto the bunk, the folder clutched in her hands. Tears streamed down her face and her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Marcus sat beside her and pulled her into his arms. She turned into his chest and let herself cry, really cry, grieving for the brother she had traveled so far to find. He held her, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring things he hoped were comforting. Time passed, measured by the flickering of the lantern and the sound of her crying. Eventually, the tears slowed. She pulled back slightly, wiping at her face with shaking hands. "I knew," she said, her voice raw. I think I knew from the moment I arrived in Hecla and nobody would talk about him. But I had to be sure. I had to try. You did everything you could. Thomas would be proud of you. Will it be enough? That note, it implicates Greer, but it does not explicitly say what happened. Would any court convict him based on that? Marcus was quiet, thinking. She was right. The note was suggestive but not conclusive. A good lawyer could argue it meant anything, and Greer had money and power. The territorial justice system was notoriously corrupt. Getting a conviction would be difficult, maybe impossible. I do not know, he admitted, but we can try. We can take this to the marshal, push for an investigation. And if that does not work, he met her eyes, then we make sure people know what he did. We tell everyone who will listen. We make it so Greer cannot show his face without people knowing he is a murderer. It might not be legal justice, but it is something. Beatrice reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his jaw. You are a good man, Marcus Lawson, the best man I have ever met. Something shifted between them in that moment. The air seemed to thicken, charged with an energy Marcus felt in his bones. He was intensely aware of how close they were, of the way her hand lingered on his face, of the look in her eyes that was part gratitude and part something deeper. Beatrice, he said, his voice rough, I need to tell you something. What? I know we just met. I know the circumstances are terrible, but I cannot stop thinking about you, cannot stop wanting to protect you, to help you, to just be near you. The words tumbled out, graceless but true. I think I am falling in love with you. Her breath caught. For a moment she just stared at him, and he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake, if he had misread everything. But then she smiled, a real smile that lit up her whole face despite the tears still wet on her cheeks. I think I am falling in love with you too, she whispered. It is crazy and impossible and terrible timing, but it is true. Marcus kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, asking permission. But when she kissed him back, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck, it deepened into something more intense. It was a kiss full of promise and need, of grief and joy tangled together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus felt like something fundamental had changed in him. What do we do now? Beatrice asked, her forehead resting against his. We go back to town. We talk to Mrs. Chen, see if she knows anything more that might help. We gather whatever other evidence we can, and then we decide our next move. He pulled back just enough to look at her. Together. Whatever comes next, we face it together. She kissed him again, quick and fierce. Together. They spent the rest of the night in the line shack, neither of them willing to risk riding back to Hecla in the dark with Greer's men possibly looking for them. Marcus gave Beatrice the bunk and tried to make himself comfortable on the floor, but she would not have it. She pulled him up beside her, and they lay together in the narrow space, fully clothed and chaste, but tangled in each other's arms. It felt natural, like they had been doing it for years instead of hours. Marcus did not sleep much. He spent the night listening to Beatrice's breathing, thinking about everything that had happened. 2 days ago, he had been a simple rancher focused on selling cattle and getting home. Now he was in the middle of a murder investigation, on the wrong side of a powerful man, and falling in love with a woman he barely knew. It should have terrified him. Instead, he felt more alive than he had in years. Dawn came too soon. They rode back to Hecla slowly, in no rush to face what waited there. The town looked peaceful in the early morning light, smoke rising from chimneys as people started their day. Nobody paid much attention as they rode in and stopped at Mrs. Chen's boarding house. The older woman came to the door when Marcus knocked, her eyes widening when she saw them. Beatrice, thank goodness. I thought maybe you were dead when you did not come back last night. Her gaze shifted to Marcus. And you went after her. May we come in? Marcus asked, glancing around the street. He had the uncomfortable feeling of being watched. "We need to talk to you privately." Mrs. Chen ushered them inside and up to her private rooms on the second floor. She made tea while Marcus and Beatrice explained everything that had happened, showed her the folder they had taken from Greer's records. Mrs. Chen's expression grew grimmer as they talked. When they finished, she was quiet for a long moment, staring into her teacup. "I knew something bad happened to that boy," she said finally. "Thomas, he was a good tenant. Polite, always paid his rent on time. He was excited about his work, talked about making a big discovery. Then one day he did not come home. I thought maybe he had moved to a different boarding house without telling me, but his things were still here and nobody seemed to know where he went." She looked up at Beatrice. "I am sorry if I had pushed harder, asked more questions." "You did what you could," Beatrice said. "We all did. Greer is the one to blame, nobody else." "What will you do now?" "Take this to the authorities," Marcus said. "Force them to investigate. With this evidence, they cannot just ignore it." Mrs. Chen shook her head. "The sheriff here, he is in Greer's pocket. And the territorial marshal, he is not much better. You think they will go after one of the richest men in Montana Territory on the word of a woman and a cowboy they do not know? They have to," Beatrice said, but there was doubt in her voice. "They do not have to do anything." Mrs. Chen stood and went to the window, looking out at the street. "You need to be careful. Greer has eyes everywhere in this town. If he finds out you have that folder, if he finds out what you know." As if summoned by the mention of his name, there was a commotion outside. Marcus moved to the window and looked down. A group of men on horseback was riding up the street. At their head was Samuel Greer himself, his face red with anger. "They are coming here," Marcus said. His hand went to his revolver. "Mrs. Chen, is there a back way out?" "Yes, through the kitchen." "But Marcus, if you run, they will chase you. And Greer, he has more men, more resources. Eventually, he will catch you." "Then we make a stand here," Beatrice said, moving to stand beside Marcus. "We tell everyone in town what he did. We make so much noise that the authorities have to listen." It was brave, but Marcus knew it was also probably futile. Still, he could not think of a better option. Running would only delay the inevitable. At least this way they could try to get the truth out. The door downstairs crashed open. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. Marcus pushed Beatrice behind him, his gun drawn. But when the door to Mrs. Chen's room burst open, it was not Greer's thugs who entered. It was the sheriff, a weathered man in his 50s with a star pinned to his vest, followed by 2 deputies. "Marcus Lawson," the sheriff said. "You are under arrest for breaking and entering and theft. Drop your weapon." Marcus did not move. "We have evidence that Samuel Greer is involved in the murder of Thomas Rollins. That folder there, it proves he had motive and opportunity." The sheriff barely glanced at the folder. "That folder was stolen from private property. Any evidence in it is inadmissible. Now drop your weapon or I will have my deputies shoot you where you stand." "Do what he says," Beatrice said urgently, grabbing Marcus's arm. "Please." Marcus saw the deputies had their guns out, hammers cocked. There was no way out of this, not without bloodshed. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered his revolver and set it on the floor. The deputies moved in immediately, grabbing his arms and wrenching them behind his back. They clapped iron shackles on his wrists, tight enough to bite into his skin. Beatrice tried to intervene, but one of the deputies pushed her back. "What about her?" the deputy asked the sheriff, gesturing at Beatrice. The sheriff looked at her with something like pity. "Miss, I suggest you leave Hecla, get on the next stage and go back where you came from. There is nothing for you here but trouble." "I am not leaving without Marcus," Beatrice said, her voice hard. "And I am not leaving until Samuel Greer answers for what he did to my brother." "Your brother left town months ago. probably drifted on to another mining camp. It happens all the time." The sheriff's tone made it clear he did not believe that any more than they did, but he was going to stick to the official story. "As for Lawson here, he broke the law. He will get a trial, and if he is smart, he will plead guilty and take a light sentence." They dragged Marcus toward the door. He twisted in their grip, looking back at Beatrice. "Do not do anything foolish," he called to her. "Wait for me. I will get out of this." "I will not let them keep you," she said, her eyes blazing. "I promise, Marcus." Then he was being hauled down the stairs and out into the street. A crowd had gathered, people drawn by the commotion. Marcus saw Samuel Greer standing on the boardwalk, a satisfied smirk on his face. Their eyes met, and Marcus felt fury burn through him. "You will not get away with this," Marcus said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "I know what you did to Thomas Rollins. I know you had him killed because he found valuable claims you wanted for yourself. And someday, everyone else will know too." Greer's smirk vanished. He stepped forward, his face mottling with rage. "That is slander." "Sheriff, I want that man charged with defamation as well." "You will get what is coming to you," Marcus said as the deputies dragged him toward the jail. "Maybe not today, but someday. Men like you always do." The jail was a small stone building at the edge of town. They threw Marcus into a cell that smelled of mildew and despair, removed his shackles, and locked the door with a heavy iron key. The sheriff stood on the other side of the bars, his expression unreadable. "You are either very brave or very stupid, son," he said. "Probably both. You should have stayed out of this. A woman's brother was murdered. How could I stay out of it? By minding your own business. By understanding that in towns like this, men like Greer make the rules." The sheriff sighed. "For what it is worth, I do not like it any more than you do. But I have got a family to feed and a job to keep. I cannot afford to go poking into things that are none of my concern." "Is that what you tell yourself so you can sleep at night?" Marcus moved to the bars, gripping them hard enough his knuckles went white. "A man is dead, maybe more than one man. And you are letting his killer walk free because it is convenient. The world is not fair, Lawson. You are old enough to know that." The sheriff turned to leave, then paused. "Trial is tomorrow morning. Judge Hendricks is coming through on his circuit. If you plead guilty, you will probably get 6 months. If you fight it, it could be years. Think about that." He left, taking the deputies with him. Marcus was alone in the cell with only his thoughts and the cold stone walls for company. The hours crawled by. Marcus paced, trying to think of a way out of this mess. He had no illusions about the trial. With the judge almost certainly in Greer's pocket and no way to present the stolen documents as evidence, his conviction was a foregone conclusion. The only question was how long he would be locked up. And what would happen to Beatrice? She had no money, no resources, no allies in Hecla except Mrs. Chen. Greer would make her life miserable until she had no choice but to leave. And Thomas's murder would go unpunished. The thought made Marcus want to punch the wall. Instead, he forced himself to think strategically. There had to be a way to turn this around, to get justice for Thomas and keep Beatrice safe. He just had to find it. As evening fell and shadows lengthened in the cell, Marcus heard footsteps approaching. He looked up, expecting to see a deputy bringing him dinner. Instead, it was Beatrice, being escorted by the sheriff himself. "You have got 10 minutes, the sheriff said gruffly, "and I will be right outside, so do not try anything." He left them alone, though Marcus could see his shadow on the wall just outside the cell block entrance. Beatrice moved to the bars, her hands reaching through to grasp Marcus's. "Are you all right?" she asked, her eyes searching his face. "Did they hurt you? I am fine. But you should not be here. If Greer finds out you are helping me." "I do not care what Greer thinks, I care about you." She squeezed his hands. I have been talking to people in town. Not everyone is afraid of Greer. There are some who would like to see him taken down if they thought it could be done safely. Beatrice, that is dangerous. Everything about this is dangerous. She glanced toward the entrance, making sure the sheriff was not listening. I spoke to a miner named Jacob White. He worked one of Greer's claims 2 years ago. He said there was an accident that killed 3 men, but he does not think it was an accident. He thinks Greer ordered the tunnel collapse to hide evidence of claim jumping. Marcus felt a spark of hope. Will he testify? He is afraid. But he gave me names of other men who might be willing to talk. If we can build a case, if we can show a pattern of Greer's crimes, maybe the authorities will have to act. It was a long shot, but it was something. That could take time, and I do not have time. The trial is tomorrow. Then we delay it. We create doubt. We make enough noise that the judge has to postpone to investigate. Beatrice's grip on his hands tightened. I will not let you rot in here for trying to help me, Marcus. I will not. Time is up, the sheriff called from outside. 1 more minute, Beatrice called back. She looked at Marcus, her green eyes fierce in the dim light. I love you. I know it has only been days, but I love you, and I am going to get you out of here. I love you too, Marcus said. More than I thought possible, but promise me you will be careful. Do not take unnecessary risks, I promise. She leaned forward and kissed him through the bars, quick but intense. Hold on, help is coming. Then she was gone, the sheriff escorting her out. Marcus stood there for a long moment, his lips still tingling from her kiss, his heart full of an emotion he could barely name. Fear and love and hope all tangled together. The night was long and uncomfortable. The cell had a thin mattress on a wooden platform that passed for a bed, and a bucket in the corner that was the only facility. Marcus dozed fitfully, waking at every sound, half expecting Greer's men to come and deal with him quietly in the night. But morning came without incident. The sheriff brought him a plate of eggs and coffee that was surprisingly good. You have got 1 hour until the trial, he said. Anything you want me to tell anyone? Send word to my father, John Lawson, in Virginia City. Tell him where I am and what happened. He deserves to know. The sheriff nodded. I will do that. For what it is worth, son, I am sorry about all this. You seem like a decent man who got caught up in something bad. Then help me, Marcus said. Look into Thomas Rollins's disappearance. Investigate Greer's operation. You have got the authority. And I have got a family. The sheriff's face was pained. I know what you think of me. Coward, corrupt lawman bought and paid for. Maybe you are right. But I have got a wife and 3 daughters. If I cross Greer, I do not just lose my job, I might lose a lot more. So yes, I take his money and I look the other way and I tell myself it is the lesser evil. You can judge me for that if you want. Marcus wanted to judge him, wanted to rage at him for his cowardice. But looking at the man's face, seeing the genuine conflict there, he found he could not. The frontier was full of people making impossible choices, trying to protect what little they had. The sheriff was not the villain here. Greer was. I hope you can live with yourself, Marcus said quietly. Me too. The trial was held in the back room of the saloon, which doubled as the town hall when needed. Judge Hendricks was a portly man with mutton chops and a bored expression, like he had already decided the outcome before hearing any testimony. The room was packed with townspeople, drawn by the spectacle. Marcus saw Beatrice sitting in the front row, Mrs. Chen beside her. The proceedings were perfunctory. The prosecution, a young lawyer who looked like he would rather be anywhere else, presented evidence of the break-in. The damaged door, testimony from the guards, the missing folder. He called Samuel Greer to the stand. Greer played his part well, the outraged victim. He testified that valuable business records had been stolen, that Marcus had trespassed on his property with clear criminal intent. He painted a picture of a drifter cowboy who had come to town looking for easy money and thought he could rob a successful businessman without consequences. When it was Marcus's turn to testify, he told the truth. He explained about Thomas Rollins's disappearance, about finding the evidence that suggested Greer had been involved, about the note that implied murder. He knew the stolen documents would not be admitted as evidence, but he wanted to get the accusations on record, to make sure people heard them. Greer's lawyer objected repeatedly, calling Marcus's testimony hearsay and slander. The judge sustained most of the objections. It was clear which way this was going. Then Beatrice stood up. "Your Honor," she said, her voice ringing clear, "I request permission to testify." The judge looked annoyed. "Young lady, this is not your trial. Sit down." "My brother was murdered by that man," Beatrice said, pointing at Greer, "and this court is helping him cover it up. If you will not let me speak, then you are complicit in his crimes." The room erupted in shocked whispers. The judge banged his gavel. "One more outburst and I will have you removed." But other people were standing now. Jacob White, the miner Beatrice had mentioned, rose from his seat near the back. "She is right. Greer is a murderer and worse, and we are all too afraid to say it." "I will have order," the judge shouted, his face red, but the dam had broken. More people stood. A woman whose husband had died in one of Greer's mines. A shopkeeper who claimed Greer had destroyed his business by undercutting his prices with goods bought with stolen money. One by one, people began speaking, sharing stories of Greer's corruption and cruelty. Marcus watched in amazement as the trial devolved into chaos. Greer was on his feet, shouting that these were all lies, that he was being slandered. The judge kept banging his gavel, but nobody was listening anymore. Then the door to the saloon burst open and a man Marcus did not recognize strode in. He was tall and lean, with a badge pinned to his vest that read U.S. Marshal. "What in the hell is going on here?" he demanded. The room fell silent. Even Judge Hendricks looked uncertain. The marshal walked to the front of the room, his boots loud on the wooden floor. "I am Marshal William Tate," he announced. "I received a telegraph from the territorial governor's office 2 days ago asking me to investigate allegations of corruption and murder in Hecla. Looks like I arrived at an interesting time." Beatrice stood again. "Marshal, I am Beatrice Rollins. My brother Thomas disappeared 6 months ago while working for Samuel Greer. I have evidence that suggests Mr. Greer was involved in his death." "That evidence was illegally obtained," Greer sputtered. "She has no right." "I will decide what rights people have," Marshal Tate cut him off. "Miss Rollins, I would like to see this evidence, and I would like to hear from anyone else who has information about Mr. Greer's business practices." What followed was hours of testimony. People who had been too afraid to speak before found their courage with the marshal present. The stories painted a picture of systematic corruption, claim jumping, fraud, intimidation, and yes, murder. The miner who had witnessed the suspicious collapse testified. Others came forward with similar stories. Through it all, Marcus sat in his chair, still technically under arrest but forgotten in the chaos. He watched Beatrice command the room, her passion and conviction swaying even the marshal's skeptical expression. She was magnificent. When she presented the folder they had stolen from Greer's office, explaining each document and how it connected to Thomas's disappearance, the marshal's face grew grave. He studied the note with the initials SG for a long time. "Mr. Greer," he said finally, "I am placing you under arrest for suspicion of murder and fraud. You will be held pending a full investigation." "This is an outrage," Greer roared. "I am a respected businessman. These people are lying. They are jealous of my success. Then you will have your chance to prove your innocence in a proper trial." Marshal Tate gestured to his deputies, who had been standing quietly by the door. "Take him." As they led a furious, protesting Greer out of the saloon, the judge turned to Marcus. "It appears the charges against you are complicated by new information. I am dismissing this trial pending the marshal's investigation." The sheriff, who had been watching everything with a stricken expression, unlocked Marcus's shackles. "You are free to go." Marcus stood, rubbing his wrists where the iron had chafed. He looked across the room and met Beatrice's eyes. She was crying, but they were tears of relief and joy. He pushed through the crowd to her, and she threw herself into his arms. "You did it," he said, holding her tight. "You got justice for Thomas." "We did it," she corrected. "I could not have found any of this without you." They held each other while the room buzzed with conversation around them. People were congratulating Beatrice, shaking her hand, apologizing for not helping sooner. Mrs. Chen was beaming with pride. Marshal Tate approached them. "Miss Rollins, Mr. Lawson, I am going to need detailed statements from both of you, and I will need that folder as evidence." "Of course," Beatrice said. "Whatever you need." "I am also going to need to investigate your brother's disappearance further. Based on what I have heard today, I believe there is enough cause to search Greer's mining operation and properties. If your brother's body is there, we will find it." Beatrice's face crumpled at that, the reality hitting her again. Marcus held her closer, murmuring comfort. "There is one more thing," the marshal said, his expression softening. "I know this is not going to bring your brother back, and I know the law can feel inadequate when measured against loss. But I promise you, we will do everything in our power to make sure Greer pays for what he did." "Thank you," Beatrice whispered. The next week was a whirlwind. Marshal Tate conducted a thorough investigation, bringing in more deputies and even some territorial officials. They searched Greer's mining operation and found evidence of multiple crimes. Forged documents, hidden accounts, and in a sealed mine shaft about 5 miles from the main camp, they found bodies. 4 bodies, to be exact. Men who had been reported as leaving town or dying in accidents, but who had actually been murdered and hidden. One of them was Thomas Rollins, identified by personal effects, and later by a tearful Beatrice viewing the remains. The funeral was small but dignified. Beatrice wept through the entire service, and Marcus stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, lending her his strength. Mrs. Chen was there, and several townspeople who had known Thomas briefly. They buried him in the cemetery outside Hecla, with a proper headstone that Beatrice had commissioned. Samuel Greer's trial was scheduled for the following month in the territorial capital. The case against him was strong, built on the testimony of dozens of witnesses and the physical evidence found at his mining operation. His lawyers were already working on a defense, but most people believed he would hang. Marcus had sent word to his father about everything that had happened. The response came back quickly, pride in his son for doing the right thing, and an invitation for Marcus to bring Beatrice home to the ranch whenever they were ready. "Your father wants to meet me," Beatrice asked when Marcus showed her the letter. They were sitting on the porch of Mrs. Chen's boarding house, watching the sun set over the mountains. "He wants to meet the woman who turned my world upside down," Marcus said, smiling. "Also, I think he is curious about what kind of person could make me risk jail and worse." "Do you regret it?" Beatrice asked quietly. "Helping me, I mean. If you had just minded your own business that day in the street, you would be home by now. No trouble, no danger, no complications." Marcus turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I regret nothing. Meeting you, helping you, falling in love with you, these are the best things that have ever happened to me. Yes, it was dangerous. Yes, it disrupted my life, but I would do it all again in a heartbeat. I love you, Beatrice said, leaning in to kiss him. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I came to Montana looking for my brother and I found you instead. Is it terrible that even though I am grieving Thomas, I am also happier than I have ever been? It is not terrible. It is human. Thomas would want you to be happy. He would want you to live your life fully. She rested her head on his shoulder and they sat in comfortable silence for a while. Finally, Beatrice spoke again. What happens now? Do we go to your father's ranch? Do I stay here? I have not thought beyond finding out what happened to Thomas. I have thought about it, Marcus admitted. About what I want, what kind of future I am hoping for. And I want you to come home with me. I want to introduce you to my family, show you the ranch, and maybe, if you are agreeable, I want to marry you. He felt her stiffen in surprise and rushed on. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a week, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are brave and smart and beautiful, and I want to spend every day I have left trying to make you as happy as you make me. Beatrice pulled back to look at him, tears shining in her eyes again. But she was smiling. Are you asking me to marry you, Marcus Lawson? I am. I know I should probably wait, do this properly with a ring and a formal proposal, but I cannot help myself. Beatrice Rollins, will you marry me? Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, absolutely yes. He kissed her then, deep and passionate, pouring all his love and relief and joy into it. When they broke apart, both breathless, Beatrice was grinning. My mother is going to have opinions about me marrying a cowboy I just met, she said. Strong opinions. Will she disapprove? Probably. But I think once she meets you, once she sees how you make me feel, she will come around. And honestly, I do not care if she does not. I am done living my life for other people's approval. They married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Hecla. Mrs. Chen stood up with Beatrice as her witness, and the blacksmith, a gruff man who had testified against Greer, stood up with Marcus. The sheriff performed the ceremony, perhaps trying to atone for his earlier cowardice by doing this one good thing. Beatrice wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her alter, and Marcus wore his best clothes, the suit he usually saved for important cattle deals. Neither of them could stop smiling through the entire service. When the sheriff pronounced them husband and wife and Marcus kissed his bride, the small group of attendees cheered. It was a far cry from the big society wedding Beatrice might have had back in Boston, but it was perfect. It was theirs. They spent their wedding night at the boarding house, Mrs. Chen having diplomatically given them her best room and made herself scarce. In the soft lamplight, with rain pattering gently against the window, Marcus and Beatrice came together with a tenderness and passion that felt like a promise. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The next morning they packed up Beatrice's few belongings, said goodbye to Mrs. Chen with many tears and promises to write, and set out for the ranch. The ride took 3 days, and Marcus used the time to tell Beatrice everything about his home, his family, and the life they would build together. His father, John Lawson, was waiting when they arrived. He was a stern-looking man in his 50s, weathered by years of hard work, but his eyes were kind. He embraced Marcus hard, then turned to Beatrice. "So you are the woman who stole my son's heart," he said, looking her over appraisingly. "I prefer to think he gave it freely," Beatrice replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. John laughed, a deep booming sound. "I like her, Marcus. She has got spine." Marcus's mother, Sarah, was less reserved. She bustled out of the house and immediately pulled Beatrice into a hug. "Welcome to the family, dear. Do not mind John. He acts tough, but he is soft as butter underneath. Now come inside, you must be exhausted from the ride." The ranch was beautiful, sprawling across a valley with mountains rising on all sides. There was a main house, sturdy and well-built, along with several outbuildings for livestock and equipment. Marcus showed Beatrice around with obvious pride, pointing out improvements he had made, introducing her to the ranch hands who worked there. Beatrice took it all in with wonder. It was so different from the cramped streets of Boston, from the rough mining town of Hecla. Here was space and clean air, and a sense of peace she had never known before. "You think you could be happy here?" Marcus asked as they stood looking out over the pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. "I think I could be happy anywhere as long as I am with you," Beatrice said. "But yes, I think I could love this place." She fell into ranch life more easily than either of them had expected. Sarah taught her the practical skills she would need. Cooking for a large household, managing supplies, the 100 small tasks that kept a ranch running smoothly. Beatrice proved to be a quick learner, and while she had her share of mishaps at first burnt bread, a disastrous attempt at churning butter, she persevered with good humor. The ranch hands were initially skeptical of the city girl who had married the boss's son. But Beatrice won them over with her willingness to work hard and her refusal to put on airs. When one of the horses colicked and Marcus was out on a cattle drive, Beatrice stayed up all night walking the animal and helping the hands treat it. After that, she was one of them. News came from Hecla periodically. Samuel Greer's trial had concluded with a guilty verdict on multiple counts of murder, fraud, and corruption. He was sentenced to hang, with the execution scheduled for November. Beatrice received the news with quiet satisfaction. It would not bring Thomas back, but at least there was justice. She wrote to her parents, telling them everything that had happened. The response was mixed. Her mother was horrified that Beatrice had married without their permission, and to a man they had never met. Her father was more philosophical, writing that he was just glad Beatrice was safe and happy, and that any man brave enough to stand up for his daughter earned his respect. "They will come around eventually," Marcus assured her when she fretted over her mother's hurt feelings. "And if they do not, well, we have got a family right here." Summer turned to fall and fall to winter. Beatrice's first winter in Montana was harsh, with snow piling up higher than she had ever seen. But the ranch house was warm, and she spent the long evenings learning to knit from Sarah, reading books from John's surprisingly extensive library, and talking with Marcus about everything and nothing. It was during one of those cozy evenings in February, with a blizzard howling outside, that Beatrice told Marcus her news. "I am pregnant," she said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "The baby should come in late summer." Marcus's face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, fear, and finally settling on a happiness so profound it made Beatrice's heart swell. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. He knelt in front of her chair and placed his hands over hers on her stomach. "A baby." "Are you happy?" Beatrice asked, though she could see he was. "I am terrified and thrilled in equal measure," Marcus admitted. "But yes, I am happy. So incredibly happy." He kissed her then, tender and reverent, and Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. A year ago, she had been alone and desperate, searching for her missing brother in a hostile town. Now she was married to a man she loved beyond reason, carrying his child, surrounded by a family that had welcomed her with open arms. Life was strange and wonderful and surprising. The baby, a boy they named Thomas John Lawson in honor of both their brothers, was born in August of 1879. The birth was long and difficult, with Sarah and a midwife from the nearest town helping while Marcus paced the floor downstairs, worried sick. But when he was finally allowed upstairs and saw Beatrice holding their son, exhausted but glowing, all the fear melted away. The baby was small and red-faced and perfect, with a surprisingly full head of dark hair. "He has your eyes," Beatrice murmured, stroking the baby's cheek. "Blue as a summer sky." "He has your courage," Marcus replied. "I can already tell." They raised Thomas with love and laughter, and as he grew, it became clear Marcus was right. The boy had his mother's fierce determination and his father's steady kindness. When he was 2, Beatrice gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Rose, after Marcus's mother. And 2 years after that, another son came, whom they named William after Marshall Tate, who had helped them get justice. The years passed in the pleasant rhythm of ranch life. Marcus and his father expanded the operation, buying more land and cattle. Beatrice proved to have a head for business and took over managing the ranch's accounts and correspondence. Together, they built something successful and lasting. They heard from Hecla occasionally. Mrs. Chen wrote regularly, updating them on the town's recovery from Greer's influence. New businesses opened. The mining operations, taken over by more honest management, continued to provide employment. The town slowly healed. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Marcus took Beatrice on a trip back to Hecla. It was her first time returning since they had left. The town looked different, cleaner, and more prosperous. They visited Thomas's grave, bringing flowers and telling him about his nephew who bore his name. "Do you think he would approve?" Beatrice asked, standing by the headstone. "Of the life we have built, I mean." "I think he would be proud of you," Marcus said. "Proud that you did not give up on him, that you fought for justice. And I think he would be happy that all that pain led to something good." Beatrice leaned against her husband, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I miss him still. I do not think that will ever fully go away. It should not go away. He was your brother, and he deserves to be remembered." They stayed in Hecla for 3 days, visiting with Mrs. Chen and some of the other people who had helped them. It was bittersweet, remembering everything that had happened, but it also provided a sense of closure. This chapter of their life was truly finished. They could move forward without looking back. The children grew. Thomas proved to be a natural with horses and cattle, spending every moment he could with his father learning the ranch business. Sarah Rose was quieter, more studious, but she had her mother's sharp mind and her father's compassion. William was the wild one, always getting into trouble, always pushing boundaries but with a heart of gold. Marcus and Beatrice grew older together, silver creeping into their hair, lines forming around their eyes. But the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it deepened, tempered by years of partnership and shared trials. They told their children the story of how they met, though they softened some of the darker details for young ears. The children loved hearing about the storm, about how their father had ridden after their mother and saved her. It sounded like something from a storybook, romantic and thrilling. Was it really like that? Thomas asked one evening when he was 15, old enough to want more than the sanitized version. Was it really so dangerous? It was, Marcus confirmed. He and Beatrice were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset as they did most evenings. The children were scattered around, Sarah reading, William carving a piece of wood with a knife, Thomas maintaining his saddle. "There were moments I thought we would not make it through. But your mother, she never gave up, never stopped fighting." "I had help," Beatrice added, reaching over to take Marcus's hand. "Your father could have walked away, most people would have, but he chose to help me even though it cost him." "It did not cost me anything," Marcus objected. "It gave me everything. It gave me you." The children groaned good-naturedly at their parents' display of affection, but they were smiling. They had grown up seeing their parents' love, had learned from their example what a good marriage looked like. Years continued to pass. Thomas married a girl from a neighboring ranch and brought her home to help run the operation. Sarah went east to school, much to her grandmother Sarah's pride, and came back with a teaching certificate to start a school for the ranch children in the area. William, after several false starts, found his calling as a lawman, joining the territorial marshal's service just as Montana was preparing for statehood. Marcus and Beatrice watched their children build their own lives with pride and occasional worry. They became grandparents, then grandparents several times over. The ranch house that had once seemed so spacious filled with the chaos and joy of an expanding family. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. There were more than 30 people there: children, grandchildren, ranch hands, neighbors, friends from town. They roasted a whole steer and danced under strings of lanterns hung in the yard. Late in the evening, when the party was winding down and people were starting to head home or to bed, Marcus and Beatrice slipped away. They walked to their favorite spot, a slight rise that overlooked the valley, and sat together on the bench Marcus had built there years ago. "Hard to believe it has been 30 years, Beatrice said, leaning her head on Marcus's shoulder. "Seems like just yesterday you were pulling me onto your horse in that storm." "Best decision I ever made," Marcus replied. He had said it 1,000 times over the years, but it was still true. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not come after me that day? If you had just stayed in town and let me walk into the storm alone?" "I would have regretted it for the rest of my life," Marcus said seriously. "And I would have missed out on the greatest adventure I could have imagined." Beatrice lifted her head to look at him. Even after 30 years, even with the lines and the gray hair, she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "Thank you," she said softly, "for choosing me. For building this life with me, for loving me through everything." "Thank you," Marcus echoed, "for letting me. For being brave enough to keep fighting even when everything seemed hopeless. For giving me a family and a purpose beyond just existing." They kissed, soft and familiar and still full of love. Below them, the ranch sprawled out in the darkness, lit here and there by lanterns. Somewhere, their grandchildren were running around playing one last game before bed. In the barn, the horses shifted and snorted peacefully. The world was quiet and good. "You think we have had a happy ending?" Beatrice asked. Marcus considered. "I do not think we have had an ending at all. Just a long, happy middle with plenty more to come," she laughed, and the sound was young and joyful despite the years. "I like that better anyway. Who wants things to end when they are this good?" They sat there under the stars, holding hands and watching their world breathe below them. The storm that had brought them together was long past, but its effects had shaped everything that came after. From violence and grief had grown love and family, and a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. Marcus thought about the young man he had been, watching a woman get thrown to the wolves and making the split-second decision to help her. He could not have known then where that decision would lead, could not have imagined the life that would unfold from that single moment of courage, but he was grateful for it. Grateful for every moment, every challenge, every joy that had come from choosing to ride into that storm after Beatrice. It had been the making of him, the making of both of them. "I love you," he said, because some things needed to be said even after 30 years. "I love you too," Beatrice replied, because some truths never got old. They sat together as the night deepened, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting from it. Around them, their family slept safe and sound. The ranch they had built would continue to thrive, passing through the generations. And the love story that had started with a storm and a rescue would be told and retold, inspiring future Lawsons to be brave, to stand up for what was right, and to never underestimate the power of choosing love. The years continued their inevitable march. Montana achieved statehood in 1889, and William was there for the celebration, now a respected U.S. Marshal. Thomas expanded the ranch even further, proving himself as capable a rancher as his father. Sarah's school became a model for rural education in the region. Marcus and Beatrice aged gracefully, still devoted to each other even as their bodies slowed. They took daily walks around the ranch when weather permitted, Marcus leaning more heavily on his cane each year, Beatrice's steps growing shorter. But their minds stayed sharp, and their love never wavered. On a clear morning in the spring of 1908, Marcus woke to find Beatrice still sleeping beside him. She looked peaceful, her face relaxed in sleep. He watched her for a moment, grateful as always for her presence, then gently touched her shoulder to wake her. She did not wake. The doctor confirmed what Marcus already knew. Beatrice had passed peacefully in her sleep, her heart simply stopping after 73 years of beating. There was no pain, no struggle. She had simply slipped away. Marcus was devastated. For the first time since that storm 30 years ago, he felt truly lost. His children gathered around him, offering comfort and support, but he felt like half of himself had been torn away. How did a person go on after losing the one who had made life worth living? He found his answer in the weeks that followed, sorting through Beatrice's things. She had kept a journal, writing in it sporadically over the years. Marcus sat in their room and read through it, discovering thoughts and feelings she had never fully shared aloud. One entry, dated a few years earlier, struck him particularly hard. Marcus worries that he will go first and leave me alone. He does not know that I have the same fear. But I have realized something important. If one of us must go on without the other, it is not a burden. It is a gift. The one left behind carries the love forward, shares it with the children and grandchildren, keeps the memory alive. That is not a sad duty. It is a privilege. So whichever of us remains, I hope they will not spend their time in grief, but in gratitude for what we had. Marcus closed the journal and cried, really cried for the first time since her death. But when the tears stopped, he felt something shift inside him. Beatrice was right. She had always been right. He had been given more than 50 years with an extraordinary woman. That was not something to mourn the end of. It was something to celebrate every remaining day of his life. He started to heal slowly. His family helped, surrounding him with love and distraction. He spent time with his grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandmother, making sure they knew how special she had been. He continued to work the ranch to the extent his aging body allowed, finding purpose in the familiar rhythms of the life they had built together. 2 years later, on a morning very similar to the one when Beatrice had passed, Marcus woke feeling different. Lighter somehow. He got up, dressed, and walked out to the spot where he and Beatrice used to sit and watch the sunset. The bench was still there, weathered but solid. He sat down and looked out over the valley. The ranch was thriving. His children were happy and successful. His grandchildren were growing up strong and kind. Everything he and Beatrice had worked for was secure, would continue on after he was gone. "I did my best," he said aloud, as if Beatrice could hear him. "I hope I made you proud." Thomas found him there an hour later, sitting peacefully with a slight smile on his face. Like his mother before him, Marcus had simply slipped away, his heart finally ready to rest. They buried him next to Beatrice in the family cemetery on the ranch, under a large oak tree they had planted together decades earlier. The entire family gathered, along with what felt like half of Montana territory. Marcus and Beatrice had touched a lot of lives over the years, and people came from all over to pay their respects. At the funeral, their grandson Marcus Thomas Lawson, Thomas's oldest son and namesake of both his grandfather and great-uncle, spoke about the legacy his grandparents had left. "They taught us that love is a choice you make every day," he said, his voice carrying over the assembled crowd. "That courage means standing up for what is right even when it is hard. That family is the most important thing we have. And that the worst storms can lead to the most beautiful outcomes if we are brave enough to ride into them." The family continued to tell the story of Marcus and Beatrice, passing it down through the generations. The ranch remained in the family, growing and adapting with the times but never losing the essential character they had given it. And every Lawson child learned the lesson that had started it all. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is reach out to help someone in need, even when it costs you. Because you never know where that simple act of courage might lead. It might just change your entire life and theirs in ways you could never imagine. The storm that had brought Marcus and Beatrice together was long forgotten by the land, washed away by decades of rain and snow and sun. But its effects lived on in every descendant who carried their blood, in every person who heard their story and was inspired to be a little braver, a little kinder, a little more willing to take a risk for love. That, in the end, was their true legacy. Not the ranch or the land or the material things they had accumulated, but the lesson they had lived every day of their lives together. That love was worth fighting for, that doing the right thing mattered, and that sometimes the greatest adventures started with a simple decision to not look away when someone needed help. The cowboy had ridden after the woman through the storm, lifted her up, and together they had built something beautiful that would last for generations. And that was the best possible ending to their story, and the best possible beginning for all the stories that would follow.